Este congreso, como ustedes saben, se celebra cada 2 años y en esta ocasión tenemos el honor y el placer de contar con la Universidad Iberoamericana como anfitriona de este encuentro. A este encuentro se han sumado 29 organizaciones y agrupaciones como respaldo, ¿no? de grupos interdisciplinarios que giran en torno a la lectura y la escritura. Y ustedes podrán ver los logos de todos ellos en el programa. Así dicho, el interés de todas estas personas que participamos es multiplicar oportunidades para conocer y conversar en torno a reflexiones, propuestas, investigaciones y trabajos diversos de cultura escrita. Entonces, celebramos que nos acompañen y celebramos su participación. En esta sesión en particular tendremos la conferencia número 12 del Eje Temático II, que lleva por título High Quality Early Childhood Education is the Model for Good Basic Education Throughout the Subsequent Grades. Presenta Catherine Snow, que es una académica de la Universidad de Harvard, Massachusetts, en Estados Unidos, y estaré moderando yo en compañía de David, que será el apoyo técnico por parte de la Universidad Iberoamericana. Permítanme compartir con ustedes brevemente cuál va a ser la dinámica de la sesión. Tendremos la conferencia de Catherine, que durará alrededor de 1 hora, tal vez un poco más, y el resto del tiempo será para la interacción con el público, ¿no? Para asegurar, ¿no?, la participación equitativa de todos, proponemos respetar pues, la siguiente dinámica, ¿no? Es dejar avanzar la conferencia de Catherine, y una vez terminada, podremos abrir los micrófonos para que los asistentes puedan interactuar, ya sea con comentarios o con preguntas. Recomendamos ampliamente que en la medida en que las preguntas vayan surgiendo, las puedan ir registrando en el chat. De esa manera podemos irlas recopilando y agrupando, y entonces planteárselas a Catherine al final. Conviene apuntar que el tiempo, digamos, promedio ideal para plantear estas preguntas, en caso de que vayan a ser de manera oral, sea no más de 2 minutos, para que pues todo el mundo tenga oportunidad de participar. Por último, comentar, que la presentación de Catherine va a ser en inglés. Viene acompañado con una presentación con muchas imágenes y algunas diapositivas mucho más puntuales, con datos y con cifras y con reflexiones. Entonces pedimos a la audiencia que en la medida en que vaya avanzando la presentación, si llega a haber alguna especie de duda o de detalle que quieran aclarar, por favor no lo hagan saber, podremos hacer una pausa y entonces yo podré hacer una recapitulación en español, ¿no?, de algunos de los conceptos, de los datos que aporte Catherine. Finalmente, me gustaría hacer una muy breve presentación de Catherine. Catherine es una mujer con una larga trayectoria. Es psicóloga educativa, es lingüista aplicada, ha sido nombrada y galardonada con distintos reconocimientos en distintas universidades. Es una experta del lenguaje y de su desarrollo en niños, y está enfocada en las habilidades del lenguaje oral, su adquisición y cómo se relacionan los logros de literacidad. Sobra decir, su trayectoria es larga y nutrida, ¿no?, como lo son sus participaciones en investigaciones diversas y publicaciones varias a lo largo de los años. Pero en lugar de aburrirles contándoles una historia impersonal, quiero ceder la palabra a la propia Catherine para entrar de lleno en la conferencia de hoy. Y lo que sí haré será ir pegando algunos links en el chat donde ustedes podrán encontrar mucho más información sobre Catherine, sobre su trayectoria y sobre sus investigaciones. Dicho esto, muchísimas gracias, Catherine, por acompañarnos. Es un honor contar con tu presencia. Y adelante, el micrófono es tuyo.
Gracias, René, y gracias a todos por estar aquí, y sobre todo a Alma Carrasco por la invitación. Lo siento que no podré seguir hablando en español. Hace muchos años ahora que no utilizo español regularmente, y los últimos 2 años sobre todo no he tenido la posibilidad para visitar en países hispanófonos, pero empiezo en español y muy pronto tendré que cambiar en inglés por las cosas un poco más técnicas, pero vamos a dar muchas posibilidades para recapitulaciones en español. Gracias a René a quien he pedido hacer las recapitulaciones. Pues es que mi pantalla está... ¿Es que se ve mi pantalla o no?
Sí, ya apareció, ya apareció la presentación.
Ahora sí, ahora sí.
Okay. Bueno, pues lo que quiero hacer hoy es explicar por qué he desarrollado esta idea que la educación parvularia forma un modelo bueno para la educación básica y educación secundaria. Hablar un poco de los aspectos de educación parvularia de calidad alta, los aspectos específicos, lo que se puede hacer dentro del aula para promover el desarrollo de los niños y explicar un poco el contraste con educación básica, educación de niños, de alumnos mayores y explorar un poco prácticas específicas que podremos utilizar en estas aulas para alumnos mayores. Pues para empezar, ¿por qué yo tengo yo quiero repensar la educación básica? Los últimos años he trabajado mucho en aulas con adolescentes. Aulas en que se ve alumnos aburridos, alumnos que no son activos, no están motivados para... los datos que tenemos muestra este fenómeno, que la motivación de alumnos baja con edad, con más tiempo en la escuela. Y son motivación, es muy difícil tener una educación de calidad alta. Pues, ¿por qué ocurre este bajada de motivación? ¿Por qué? Para ver un contraste con lo que ocurre en aulas de niños pequeños. Este es un aula en Sudáfrica. Muchos niños en el aula, no es una situación muy buena, el sitio, pero están escuchando con mucha motivación porque es un cuento muy interesante y un cuento que es relevante para sus intereses. Otros ejemplos, un aula en Chile, en que los niños están haciendo cosas que han elegido. Están trabajando en actividades auténticas. Tienen muchas oportunidades para hablar, para participar en las conversaciones, para leer libros que han elegido ellos en grupos para que puedan discutir lo que se ven en los libros. Este es en un aula en Oklahoma. Se ve que los niños tienen muchas preguntas, mucha motivación para participar. Que hay oportunidades en estas aulas para participación de los padres y para relaciones afectivas entre adultos y niños. Un padre que ayuda con la producción de unos de estos libros, pues proyectos interesantes en que hay colaboración para producir textos auténticos. Se ve aquí un niño llamado Espíritu, escrito por Raúl, ilustrado por Raúl y mamá. Pues una colaboración auténtica. Pues lo que se ve son algunos aspectos de educación, de un proceso educativo en que hay relaciones positivas, en que hay engagement, ¿cómo se dice engagement? Engagement profundo con textos, con cuentos, con actividades literarias, que los niños pueden producir textos, escribir textos sobre tópicos que les interesan, que se pueden trabajar en grupos con ayuda de sus colegas, y que pueden hablar, que tienen muchas oportunidades para hablar. Pues estos son los aspectos que vemos en educación parvularia de calidad alta, pero no es siempre presente naturalmente estos aspectos. Y lo que voy a explicar un poco son los resultados de un par de estudios para analizar más profundamente por qué, cuándo y cuáles son los aspectos específicos de calidad que producen esta calidad. Pues que se ve aquí un ejemplo de los retos que existen. Un aula parvularia, también en Chile, donde no hay mucho sitio, los niños se sientan apretados sin suficiente oportunidad para empezar estas actividades variadas. Y también es un aula sin calefacción en el invierno. Pues necesitan hacía frío, demasiado frío para estudiar. O un aula como este en China, donde los niños deben sentarse y escuchar, y no tienen mucha oportunidad para iniciar conversaciones o actividades. Ok, pues voy a recapitular un estudio viejo ahora, que con múltiples fases, pero simplemente la primera, en lo que hemos aprendido estudiando los aspectos de calidad en esta situación en Chile. Fue un proyecto que se llama Un Buen Comienzo, que ha tenido muchas etapas de desarrollo. Un proyecto largo como Chile. Okay, now I'm going to switch to English. Maybe, Renee, you need to explain what I've been saying in Spanish. I don't know how clear it's been.
No, ha sido realmente claro. El tono y la velocidad han sido adecuados y yo creo que, a reserva de que me corrijan los asistentes, creo que ha sido suficientemente claro todo lo que has expuesto como introducción.
Excelente, okay. Muy bien, very good.
Gracias. Mi español es muy caro. We started with, in Chile, with an experimental study that took 3 years, 4 years actually, and that was in Santiago, and then moved on for reasons I will explain to a quality improvement study, and then a much larger study. I was mostly involved in this first phase. So I won't talk very much about the later phases, but I'm going to talk about what we learned from phase 1 about quality in early childhood education. There was, of course, a large team involved in this study, and I want to particularly mention my co-PI, Hiro Yoshikawa, and Andrea Rolla, who was the coordinator of the project for the first few years of it, and many collaborators involved. So it was an effort to improve quality through teacher professional development using coaching. And we had designed 12 cycles of coaching, so 6 cycles per year for over 2 years for pre-K, classrooms of 4-year-olds, and K, and kinder, classrooms of 5-year-olds. So pre-kinder and kinder, and each coaching cycle involved the coach, a workshop, the coach modeling a new practice, then observing while the teacher implemented that practice, and then some reflection and review. So this was the basic model, and the content was focused on, among other things, improving the quality of language in the classroom. The whole study was begun because, in effect, classrooms, there were many new classrooms being introduced in Chile at that time at the pre-K level, but nobody was worried very much about what was supposed to go on inside those classrooms. So we observed that the quality of the language interactions was very low. There was a lot of rote, there was a lot of recitation, but very little opportunity for the children to engage. In order to measure what we were doing, we used the class, which is a measure that is very widely used. I'm sure many of you know it. And it provides scores on 3 scales: emotional support, classroom organization, and instructional support. We measured the class at the beginning of pre-K, end of pre-K, and end of K, following the children through 2 years. So we implemented this intervention in 32 schools, 50 classrooms, and had random assignment so that another 32 schools did not receive it. Now, this might need a little explanation, but the results I'm going to talk about are all presented as effect sizes, percents of standard deviation. And I could explain more about that, or you could just believe me that a small effect is smaller than 0.3, a moderate effect is 0.4 to 0.6, and a large effect is bigger than 0.6. Does anybody need an explanation of effect sizes? Okay. So after 1 year of this intervention, we were very happy to see that we had the following effects on our class scores. That in the experimental group, the class scores were 0.8 of a standard deviation higher than in the control group. And the classroom organization, 0.45, and the instructional support, 0.43. And this is a big effect, and these are very solid, moderate effects. And these are especially big effects in education. Don't normally get such large effects from a year's worth of intervention in an educational setting. So we were very pleased with the impact of the intervention. But we weren't so pleased when we looked at the absolute scores, right? So yes, we had better scores in emotional support and classroom organization, but the instructional support scores remained very, very low. Really, this is about as low as you can score in instructional support. So it looked like these classrooms were still not providing much good instruction. And a year later, we continued the intervention for another year and the support for another year. And at the end of another year, the effects were even smaller, and they were 0 for instructional support. So somehow the effects were impressive at the beginning, but fading, not sustained. And they were strongest in the domains where the classrooms had already been quite good. These were very warm and loving classrooms. They just were not very cognitively challenging classrooms. They weren't very language-rich classrooms. So we improved a little bit what they already knew how to do, but we didn't improve in the domain in which the education system was weakest. And these class scores on instruction remained very low. So we tested the children, of course, because we wanted to see effects on children. And our effects on children were terrible. They were 0. A little bit of improvement in self-regulation, but nothing in language or literacy, which is what we were most interested in. We were very depressed, needless to say. We've done 2 years worth of hard work to improve classroom quality because we thought classroom quality would improve child outcomes, and it didn't. So why? What's going on? Where are the challenges? I appreciate people interpreting for me in the chat as we go along. So what went wrong here? Well, we thought about it as a project team, and we thought, well, all right, if you look, we've taught some new practices to the teachers, but maybe they didn't do them that often, right? They might do them, but not very frequently. So practices like reading books with children, which in American early childhood classrooms happens for 30, 40 minutes a day that teachers read aloud and discuss books with children. How much time is that really happening in these Chilean classrooms? So Susana Mendive and Christina Weiland did an analysis of videos taken in the classroom. And they found that the experimental classrooms were spending less time doing recitation than the untrained classrooms. And they were spending a little more time in literacy activities. But overall, still very little time in any of these good literacy activities, 12 minutes a day by the end of the first year and during the second year. And 12 minutes a day reading books with children in preschool, in kindergarten, in pre-kinder and kinder, just isn't very much. It isn't enough to really enrich the language development of the children. So we think, yes, there was limited time. We had shown people some new things to do, and they did them, but we hadn't emphasized enough. You have to do this a lot. Our collaborator, Mary Catherine Arbour, who was an MD, also noticed in the classrooms that the numbers of children present were extremely variable. Now, the teachers and the principals, of course, reported absenteeism every day, but they always reported 100% of the children were present. And in fact, we knew, because we were counting the kids, that there were many fewer than 100% present. The reimbursement methods for the schools prioritized suggesting that lots of kids were there. So Mary Catherine Arbour developed a way of estimating, of actually counting and then predicting which children were likely to be absent a lot. And she found, and then reanalyzed the data, looking only at the children with the most consistent attendance. And indeed, those children were showing positive effects of being in intervention classrooms. So this is very logical, of course. You have a good program. Students don't benefit from the good program if they don't come to school. Why don't they come to school? Well, pre-kinder in particular was a new practice in Chile, and the parents didn't think of it as like school. They thought of it as like babysitting. So they didn't use it if they didn't feel, if they preferred to spend time with their children. But this is another indicator of one of the ways in which high quality early childhood education can be derailed if children are not encouraged to attend. So yes, too little time. Yes, too much absenteeism. And then a doctoral student named Jocelyn Bone started analyzing what was really going on, how the teachers were actually teaching vocabulary, which was one of our major outcomes. She published 2 papers on this topic. And here's what she found, that one of the basic principles that you might think is, well, teachers who talk a lot and have a very variable vocabulary in their own speech will have children who acquire more language. And so she counted how many words teachers produced and how many different words teachers produced per minute. And in fact, that turned out not to be significant at all in predicting vocabulary growth, how much vocabulary children learned from the beginning to the end of the year. She also coded what kind of information was presented when new words were introduced or defined. And some of that was what she called declarative. This word means. And some of it was embedded in other topics, conceptual information. And in fact, this conceptual information didn't mostly occur when the teachers were reading books with children or were doing what they called vocabulary. It occurred when they were teaching other topics, when they were teaching about the ecology, when they were teaching about gardening, when they were teaching about endangered species. That was when really a lot of conceptual information was presented during other topic discussions. And that is what predicted vocabulary growth. So the end of kindergarten vocabulary growth strongly predicted by teachers' use of conceptual information, presentation of conceptual information in which they embedded words that the kids didn't know. So what does that mean? Well, I think that means that you need to have curricular content which creates opportunities for introducing words and ideas that kids might be interested in. So I think in some sense in teaching teachers traditional vocabulary instructional methods, we were taking them down the wrong path. And what they were doing during conceptual instruction was actually much stronger. So what did we learn from Un Buen Comienzo, the first phase? We learned to attend not just to fidelity of implementation, but also to dosage, how much of these good practices were going on. We learned that you have to address structural problems like absenteeism, and that you can utilize curricular content that's already there to build skills in more strategic ways. So should I stop there, René, and ask if you need to? I realize you've been giving quick summaries.
Sí, he estado, bueno, intentando hacer como pequeños comentarios o traducciones, vaya, como de los conceptos principales que estás presentando. Me gustaría más bien saber por parte de la audiencia si en este momento requieren alguna recapitulación o repaso de algunos de los conceptos o ideas presentadas por Catherine, o está funcionando el ejercicio de traducción del chat. Siéntanse en libertad de...
Okay.
Sí,
Seguimos su
sí,
argumentación.
va muy bien así,
Perfecto.
comentan, perfecto, muy bien.
Ok, perfecto. Gracias mucho a René, que está haciendo el trabajo más tan exigente. So, Un Buen Comienzo, it had this experimental study, and those were the lessons we learned. And then the team in Chile went on to implement those lessons in a quality improvement study, which wasn't experimental, but it was an effort to help classrooms attend to what are we going to do to improve, to reduce absenteeism? What are we going to do to introduce more interesting curricular content? And this was a phase of the study that involved the teachers trying to problem solve together with the researchers. So that was very important next phase. And they also learned lessons which then got applied in the UBC Plus expanded application. So let me talk about one other study. This is one that's been very important in US thinking about early childhood education. It was carried out by Christina Weiland and Hiro Yoshikawa. Both of them were at Harvard at the time, and Hiro was the co-PI on the Chile study. Christina was a doctoral student when she did this, and she's now my collaborator on an extension of this study. Boston Public Schools in those years, in 2010, 29, decided that its 4-year-old classrooms, of which it had some 4-year-olds, so pre-kinder classrooms, that they weren't very good, and it decided to introduce really rich curriculum into those classrooms, language and literacy curriculum and math curriculum. And it did this because the schools, the city, were planning on investing much more into pre-kinder. And they wanted to make sure they were doing something that worked, something that was going to pay off for better child development. So the question was, is the pre-K program contributing to closing achievement gaps, to promoting success? And does it have longitudinal impacts? That was the point of that study. And it was designed not as an experimental study, because it was impossible politically to do random assignment, but as a regression discontinuity study. I'll explain that in a minute. But so at the time, only about a third of the city 4-year-olds were enrolled. But the decision had been made to treat the teachers of pre-K just like teachers in higher grades, which is not always the case, that make them professionals, and to introduce this curriculum, this strong curriculum, language and literacy curriculum and a math curriculum, building blocks. And to provide coaches so that the coaches would be regularly available to the classroom teachers. The study involved 74 pre-kinder classrooms and observations of the curriculum implementation with 2,000 kids in 67 schools involved in the design. So what was the design? All right. Basically, the idea is there's an age cutoff for getting into pre-kinder. If you're 4 by September, you get in. If you're 3 and 364 days old, you don't. So this design uses that difference between kids who are almost 4 and kids who are just 4 to estimate the impact of the program. So the treatment group, who are just old enough, can be compared to the control group, who are just not quite old enough, right? And you might imagine a kid born on August, on September 1st, isn't that different from a kid born on August 31st, but nonetheless, they fall into different groups. So distance from age cutoff becomes then the crucial variable here. And if you have this kind of growth among the kids who are too young, who don't get into the program, and this elevated growth among children who do, then that tells you the program is making a difference. Maybe you should repeat that. And it's here that you want to make the distinction. Okay.
Sí, básicamente mencionar que hay una diferencia significativa entre los grupos de niños previo a los 4, post a los 4, independientemente de por cuántos días o meses. Entonces, sí hay un aumento significativo en el grupo de 4 cumplidos en adelante.
Okay. So, again, we're going to be showing effect sizes. So think 0.2 is typical, 0.4 is pretty good, 0.6 is incredible. And these are effects for vocabulary, early reading, math, and another test of math, the Woodcock-Johnson, and a different, more challenging math test. And so you can see these are really very, very big effects. The difference between the kids who were in the pre-K program because they were just old enough and those who weren't because they were just a little too young. And you can see this maybe most clearly for PPVPT, the vocabulary. So obviously you've got variability in both groups. The younger group that just didn't make it has scores all over here, these blue scores. The older group that did make it has these scores. And of course, some of them are very low. And some of these scores are very high, but the average here is a significant difference of about 8 points and that's a 0.45 effect size. So, fantastic results for language literacy and math. Also positive effects for measures of executive function, working memory, digit span, pencil tap, and a measure of inhibitory control, not just doing things, but actually being able to control one's actions. Emotion labeling, which is an indicator of emotional development, was also significantly impacted. But these impacts were considerably lower than those for language literacy and math. So, okay, this is a program that had paid a lot of attention to curriculum and to teacher professional development and to coaching. And you might want to compare the effects that were found in Boston to those of other pre-K programs. 2 very good pre-K programs in Oklahoma, I showed you a picture of one of them, also had pretty important effects on letter word identification and applied problems. But in general, across the board, the impacts of large public pre-kinder programs are not as solid, not as strong as those in Boston. So it seemed that there was something really special going on in Boston. And our hypothesis is that it had to do with the very cognitively rich and challenging curriculum. So that all happened, that paper was published in 2013. And it was rigorous, but there are some questions that you can't answer with such rigorous designs. And in particular, we were interested in now, as the program gets institutionalized and as the program develops and expands to all the children in Boston, do the recommended practices hold up? Are they still happening? And which of them predict long-term academic outcomes? Which of these specific practices what are the characteristics of the classrooms that are having the best effect? And so I'll just give you a little more data here. I know I'm sort of overwhelming people with data, but this is a study that's just about to be accepted, we hope, after revisions, on those pre-K programs predicting child games from specific practices, specific characteristics. And our general hypothesis, of course, is content-rich and cognitively demanding instruction. So we did careful, detailed classroom observations, focusing on how teachers were implementing this language and literacy curriculum and building blocks, the math curriculum. This focus on children, by the way, is a curriculum you can all find on the web. If you look for Focus on Children BPS, Focus on K1 BPS, you'll see what the curriculum looks like. And there are a number of features. This is probably a little hard for everyone to read, but a number of features in the classrooms that were scored, and we mathematically put them into 2 groups, those that indicated cognitive demand and those that indicated rich content. The rich content were things like, in the whole group activities, was there a focal question? Do kids know why you're reading this book? Do they know what they're supposed to be thinking about and discussing? Is there lots of information made available about that focal connection? After you leave the big group and go to small centers, are there connections made to that focal question and that central theme? Are vocabulary words defined? Are there connections across different activities? So that's what we called content-rich instruction. And cognitive demand includes things like rich vocabulary, academic language, lots of questions like, why do you think that? How do you know that? What do you think is going to happen next? In other words, challenging, thinking, demanding questions, thought demanding questions. So those two constructs we looked at in their relationship to measures on the class and quality of implementation of the curriculum. And so what you see here, this is content-rich instruction, and this is cognitive demand. That implementing these curriculum in a highly faithful way, sticking to the curriculum, correlated with cognitive demand and with content-rich instruction. So the curriculum plays a very important role here. Also relates to instructional support. Cognitive demand predicts instructional support on the class. So there's a little cluster of good, high-quality practices here. Do they have an impact on kids? Well, we didn't see a relationship to child outcomes for language or literacy. This was only 300 kids, so it's not a huge sample. But we did find an impact, a significant impact of content-rich instruction on math outcomes for the kids who scored higher in math, not the kids who scored lower in math to begin with. In other words, these kids could benefit. The higher, the more skilled students could benefit from the content-rich instruction. And again, they could benefit from high cognitive demand. In fact, they benefited quite a lot from high cognitive demand. The kids who started out the school year low in math actually benefited from lower cognitive demand. So again, this is a challenge in heterogeneous classrooms. How do you adapt the right level of instruction to the kids? And it clearly suggests you need small group instruction and more personalization. Of course, very disappointed that we didn't get any effects for language and literacy here, but we will do this again with a much larger sample. So what can we conclude here? First of all, they've got these features in pre-K and K classrooms that are always there when the quality of instruction is good, right? They're really lovely, warm places. They're nice places. You've got learners getting to do a lot of self-selected activity, deeply engaged with stories, listening to stories, looking at books, being read to, looking at books with other kids, reading in small collaborative groups, writing about topics that they're interested in. Learners given a voice in the classroom, given opportunities to ask questions and to speculate and to explain their own thinking. And these really engaging curricular topics, the curriculum organized by wonderful children's books, but then expanding beyond the content of the book to promote lots of activities, drawing pictures about the books, doing plays about the books, learning about the background content, and parent involvement in many cases. How does that contrast with basic education classrooms? Well, relationship building is something that some teachers do, but not all. The learners, the students, have much less autonomy to choose activities or texts of personal interest. Basically, everybody reads the same thing. Reading is thought of as an autonomous activity. You go sit and figure out what's in the book on your own. Writing is far too often for practice, for copying, or for practicing handwriting, or for doing spelling exercises, rather than writing for authentic communication. Most of the activities are whole group, so it's much harder to do the kind of personalization or adaptation that is desirable in responding to students' needs. There's many fewer opportunities for students to nominate topics or initiate questions, and the curricular topics are often quite dull. So all of these features, I think, are what account for how bored and disengaged kids become. Now, these aren't universal features in primaria. They're great teachers can transcend these, can come up with engaging curriculum and lots of opportunities for student engagement, but it's much less common in grades 1 to 12. And that's why I think these pre-kinder and kinder classrooms should be much more of a model for what everybody is doing in primaria. So how do you do that? What are the procedures? Well, project-based learning, which automatically includes authentic reading and writing. So rather than reading and writing, everybody reading the same text, if there's a project, for example, one of Nell Duke's favorite projects is write a guide for your local zoo. So you have to go find information about the different animals in the zoo. And because you've picked the animal you want to work on, you go find information, and maybe you're copying it from Wikipedia, or maybe but it's information that you've chosen to deal with and you have collaboration with other members of your group to do that. Then you have to write up a little report about your favorite animal. So it's an opportunity to do the practice and the skills-focused learning, but in the context of an authentic task. Putting kids in groups based on interest so that they can learn from each other. So rather than the low reading group, middle reading group, high reading group, having the dinosaur reading group and the princess reading group and the volcanoes reading group, so that kids have an opportunity to select what they want to read and learn about something that they're really interested in. Regular opportunities for authentic discussion, for real discussion. And that is difficult to organize in the classroom. Teachers are very worried about authentic discussion because kids say things that are very honest. But it's a crucial aspect of good quality education. And of course, better curriculum modified to promote relevance and engagement. So this is a pretty general set of guidelines. All I can do is give one example, I think, of the kinds of work that would represent this shift in classroom practice. I've worked for many years with a group called SERP, and we've developed a whole array of curricular resources that are designed according to these principles: engaging topics, support for practice, and for engagement in discussion. And they're all organized around dilemmas, right? The organizing topic is not a question, but it's a dilemma. It's a question to which there is no good answer. So everybody gets to discuss it, and the teacher doesn't hold the final authority. Silvia Romero Contreras and Gabriela Silva at San Luis Potosí have translated and adapted to the Mexican context several of our word generation units, and they will become available almost immediately on our website. But here's one example of an adaptation. So the dilemma here is, should junk food be sold in schools? And there are lots of reasons why junk food should be sold in schools. The kids like it. The schools make money from it. But there are lots of reasons why it shouldn't. Kids are badly nourished. They eat the junk food. They won't eat the good food. It's seductive. So this is a topic on which you can have a real discussion, an authentic discussion. And nobody can just say, oh, this is the right answer or this is the wrong answer. In the process of having the discussion, there are lots of opportunities to use these words, the new vocabulary words, incorporan, incidencia, transportar, that are taught in the course of this unit. This is a curricular intervention that takes about 15 minutes a day and over the course of the week. But a key element of it is that toward the end of the week, the students actually have a debate about this topic. And as I say, this is one of several that has been translated into Spanish and adapted to Mexico. Another is Vale la pena invertir en tecnologías ecológicas. It's very expensive. When should we do it? When shouldn't we do it? Not a question to which there is an easy answer, but one that kids can get very engaged in discussing. So I leave you with that set of things to think about. I'm sure if you wanted to know more about these units or get access to them very quickly, that Sylvia Romero would be a resource. And I wish I could give you a website to get them from right now, but they're not quite ready for, they haven't quite been mounted on our SERP website yet. So thank you very much, Renee, for your mediation here, and to all of you for listening to my bad Spanish and rapid English. And I look forward to questions or further discussion.
Muchas gracias a ti, Catherine, por tu muy interesante presentación. Y nada, simplemente abrimos ahora los micrófonos o la sala de chat como tal, que está abierta para quien quiera entablar ahora una conversación con Catherine pueda hacerlo, ya sea que active su micrófono y directamente hablen, o pueden levantar la mano y damos la palabra, o directamente escribir la palabra en el chat, perdón, la pregunta en el chat, ya sea que la lea en español o que la traduzca directamente para Catherine, o que ustedes, si están en posibilidad, la escriban directamente en inglés. Es decir, hay manera de comunicarnos. Entonces, adelante, el micrófono es de ustedes ahora.
Catherine, gracias por esta conferencia maravillosa. Me parece que como conferencia de cierre del Congreso, nos ofrece varias de las ideas que han estado presentes a lo largo de la semana. Una tiene que ver con la importancia en tu título de la alta calidad en las intervenciones. Otra con el eje de la oralidad, la lengua oral como muy presente en las intervenciones en la escuela. Y la otra, para muchas de las personas que estamos aquí, la importancia de conocer los retos de una investigación que busca incidir en las mejores prácticas en la escuela y que revisa críticamente lo que se hace. So, thank you very much, because you talk with us as a researcher, as a teacher with high compromiso with all the people who are in classrooms, and you always teach us better roots for research and for intervention in early literacy education. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Alma. Y para enfatizar la oralidad, no solo en educación parvularia, pero también en educación básica, la importancia de oportunidades para discusión, para hablar, para preguntar dentro de la aula para todos los alumnos de todas edades. Gracias.
No se escucha tu micrófono, Alma.
Gracias. Mientras otras personas se animan a comentar con Catherine, a mí me gustaría decirles que el Fondo de Cultura Económica tiene en México un libro que hicieron hace mucho tiempo, del que Catherine fue coautora de esta investigación para los primeros años, un buen comienzo, una guía para promover asuntos de literacidad, de oralidad, de lectura, desde que son pequeños. Y a mí me encantó, Catherine, que señalaras algo que es fundamental en las intervenciones escolares y que tiene que ver con lo difícil que resulta para los docentes traducir en cambio de prácticas inmediatas, por más convencidos que estén de que las prácticas deben de cambiar, ¿no? Y creo que esto es parte de lo que tenemos que seguir trabajando en las escuelas, porque hay muchas buenas iniciativas de formación de maestros, pero al final los maestros nos tardamos en cambiar las prácticas. No es suficiente declarar que estoy entendiendo para cambiar mi práctica docente, ¿no? Y también en casa, ¿no?
Precisamente. Pero cuesta tiempo, cuesta muchas oportunidades para practicar, para modelar, para hacer errores, deviaciones, pero no, es un proceso muy largo, muy difícil.
Tenemos una mano levantada.
Malva. Hola.
Gracias, Catherine. It's a great pleasure to meet you. Thank you for such a didactic presentation and for using Spanish. Your Spanish is really amazing.
Ojalá.
No, realmente, muchas gracias. Dos comentarios y gracias, René. Uno de ellos es que la educación, our pre-K and K education, is very similar to the primary practices you described. I don't know if this is a problem in the area in Latin America, but in Chile, it's serious. That's one thing. The second one is that we do not attend writing properly, I think. Our teachers and us, the teacher educator, I perhaps are part of the problem. Do not see writing more than a subproduct of learning to read. And another question is, UBC, I think it's isolated now and trying to survive. They are not able now to pay for class and the Woodstock, the Woodcock Munoz that you used while it was experimental. What do you think? How can the program maintain or improve after the study?
Yeah, no, that's always the challenge, isn't it? The sustainability, introducing new good practices, but then how do they get maintained? And that's exactly the problem we're seeing here in Boston too, because those huge effects that Weiland and Yoshikawa found in the first couple of years of the Boston pre-K program, they're not, they're not, that we're still, it's still a good program and there's still positive effects, but they're not nearly as large, because as the program has spread, as more teachers have been hired, as more coaches have been hired, it's just hard to keep it so high quality and so demanding. So sustainability is absolutely, I think we know what we should be doing in preschool classrooms. I think, you know, maybe in Chile they're not doing it yet, but we know what it should look like. But getting it introduced and then getting it maintained is a huge issue. And yeah, I hope we do start to think about this as something that should start in teacher education, in the formación, because that is a very important starting point for change. So you're doing great work on that, Malva.
We wonder. Thank you. Thank you, Kat.
Me permito interrumpirles. Tenemos un par de participaciones más en puerta. Tenemos un par de comentarios en el chat que quisiera leer para Catherine, y después hay una mano levantada. Le daremos la palabra en su momento. Primero hay un comentario de Liliana Montenegro. I'm going to read it for you in English. But it's very basic. You can understand it. It says, the professional development of teachers that are in service plays a very important role to achieve quality interventions. So if you could elaborate further on the topic, maybe? That is a question. Yeah. Could you elaborate further?
Well, this is the point that Alma also raised, that professional development is not a silver bullet, right? We have to think of it as ongoing, constant, as part of a teacher's life to participate in ongoing professional support and what here we are now calling professional learning groups, in which teachers have some autonomy, but there is also some guidance. I'm currently doing a project in another school district with the kinder grade 1, grade 2 group. And they've had this enormous struggle. They've improved their outcomes a lot, but they've done it by having weekly professional development for teachers in the schools, inside the schools, in which they focus on their recommended practices. But then the teachers understandably want to take control of those professional development sessions. And then they start doing things that are not consistent with the model that the district has in mind. And that's too bad, because kids move back and forth across schools, because the teachers who can do that are the more experienced ones, but there are always new teachers coming in who need to get the basics of these practices. So it's we've organized, say, medical practice in a way to make sure that there's a core set of protocols that everybody uses and that everybody has a lot of time to get trained in. We don't have that in education, right? That you have a year maybe to learn how to do it, and then you have a 3-day orientation of how we do it here, and then you're all on your own. And it's just, it's really not treating teachers like the professionals they are. So I don't have a solution, I'm sorry.
No hay una solución, es una tarea constante. Hay un comentario adicional, hay una intervención adicional de Vanessa Castro Cardenal, que también veo que tiene levantada la mano. Entonces no sé si quieres hacer directamente tú tu intervención, Vanessa.
Perfecto. Good morning and nice to see you all there. I think this is a very important topic, and I was really happy to hear Professor Catherine Snow talking about it. I was sharing a finding of a study that we just finished in Nicaragua, a team from ANL, that's the Asociación Nicaragua Lee, and we found out that the children in 3rd grade that had a teacher reading aloud to them for 10 minutes at least every day had a word reading fluency much more higher than the other ones. It had significance, statistically significant, and is 39 words correct difference. That's, for me, astounding. I mean, I was surprised. I was expecting to find a really fall down in every result because last year, despite the COVID, our schools were open, and these are marginalized schools in rural areas and in a cultural environment that is the Caribbean coast that has multiple languages and also was hit by the hurricanes at the end of the year. But there is a surprising finding that I would like to communicate because it sort of amuses me, is that in oral comprehension and reading comprehension, all children, or on the average, children have better results than in the baseline that was conducted in 2018. I was surprised because I have read a lot about the association between fluency and comprehension, but in this case, they were down in fluency. In 2018, 20.4% of students were reading above or on the goal of IDEL, and in this study, we had like perhaps 10% less of children in the rural areas reading on the goal, and in the sample, 4% less. Then I was surprised that they improve a lot in reading comprehension, answering more questions correctly than they did in 2018. We were speculating, and some of the speculations I had in my mind was that they have reading clubs, and we have been, as a campaign to promote reading for motivating children, not for learning, but for just love reading, we have been distributing like 10,000 books per year for poor children, poor schools, and communities. And this organization that is doing the intervention also distributes food, but they involve parents in chores as reading to children at home, and also in preparing food and things like that. But I was surprised about the discrepancy between the literature I have read and the results, because if fluency went down, we were expecting comprehension to go down. Then my thoughts were, perhaps it's the reading clubs that are doing interesting questions, that the literature is selected by the children, they are not imposed by a teacher, and it's just a thought. I am not sure about that. We should need to do more research on the topic, but these clubs have been working for 10 years now, and they might be the reason. I just wanted to share that finding because it sort of surprises me. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. No, but this reading aloud is a remarkably underutilized practice, I think, in classrooms, but because it's wonderful because it gives even poor readers access to the rich language of books. And of course, it's best if it's also accompanied by some discussion of what is read, so that the kids get a chance to actually ask questions and talk about it. But if you have anything written up about that study, I would love to have you send it to me.
It would be a pleasure. There is a long report, 200 pages. But
excellent. Oh yeah, well, I'll read the executive summary at least.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you see my, my email address? I had it up on the screen, but I can put it in chat too.
I photographed it.
I'm going to put it in the chat. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm going to put it in the chat for you.
Great, thank you. Am I still sharing my screen, Renee? Should I do something to stop sharing?
I think you are still. I just requested the technical support to have you.
I don't know how to stop share.
With the same button that you began, but you are already front page. You are like your camera.
Primer plano. Okay.
Yeah, your primer plano. So I'm going to share with you lo siento, voy a compartir con ustedes la dirección de correo de Catherine en el chat. Y tenemos un par de manos levantadas. Tengo a Malva y tengo a Andrea. Le damos primero la palabra a Andrea en virtud de que Malva ha participado ya una vez. Entonces, adelante, Andrea, si quieres abrir tu micrófono, adelante.
¿Qué tal? Buenos días. Mucho gusto, doctora. Thank you so much for your intervention. One of my passions is teacher education. I've worked in teacher education for a long time and professional development. And I think one of the key things that you mentioned in setting up the study was the need to treat pre-K teachers as professional teachers, as professionals. And I think that continues to be such an important distinction in how we provide professional development to teachers and the opportunities that they get, and also the consistency of long-term professional development versus just giving them a set of strategies and saying go do it. And so I wonder if you can maybe talk a little bit more about how you made that shift of making sure that pre-K teachers were seen as professional development, because I do think that is one of the missing pieces in most of the professional development that's offered in schools, which is outside in. It never involves teacher voices. It never creates communities of inquiry. It never allows for, like you said, trial and error to master practice. Not to just try an activity, but to really gradually improve practices. You have to be an apprentice, and you have to have, a model and someone to guide you. So I think that is such an important component as we look forward in how to continue to create those strong professional communities.
No, I agree. And I recognize the challenge, because of course, to the extent that also depends on outside support, on a coach or a professional development leader, it's very expensive. What happens in US schools is when there's extra money, they hire coaches. And then as soon as the budget shrinks, the coaches get fired. And so those structures come and go. But I think actually, I wish I knew, maybe Malva knows more about what the second phase of Un Buen Comienzo in Chile, that this continuous quality improvement phase, which was mediated by, to begin with, by an outside a professional in quality improvement. But the basic idea is that groups of teachers get together and decide what they think their biggest problem is, the next problem, and then hypothesize mechanisms to address it, and then actually to collect the data to see whether it's getting addressed. So in the absenteeism case, for example, the teachers in that phase 2 Chile project, they said, oh yeah, no, we've got big problems with absenteeism. Let's figure out what we can do. And they started, for example, putting a very simple strategy, but you put the kids' names up and then they get a sticker every day they're there. And the kids who has the most stickers at the end of the month gets a prize or something. So the kids start to also play a role in making decisions about, but you have to make the data visible, and you have to agree on the accountability of collecting and using the data. That's a little harder to do when the practices are more abstract, like but something like I'm going to read aloud for 15 minutes a day. That's easy enough. Then the challenges are, well, how do we pick the right books, or how do we pick texts that are appropriate and engaging. So I think it's absolutely, it is absolutely crucial. There's this idea that because you're dealing with 4-year-olds, you don't have to know as much as if you're dealing with 14-year-olds. And in fact, you have to know a lot more. It's a really much bigger challenge. So I have to give a lot of credit to the Boston Public Schools in their decision about implementing their universal pre-K program. That part of the program is that the teachers get the teachers who've been working in Head Start programs, for example, or other early childhood service settings, that if they're part of the program, if they're accepted into the program, they get the same salary as a public school teacher, and they get the same benefits as a public school teacher, and they get the same level of coaching. So it is a real commitment to professionalization. So Malvo, do you have some inside information about UBC2?
Well, that's my impression, that they are having a difficult time now, because I see Liliana Montenegro agreeing with me that we have a problem with the change of the teachers at schools. The school teams change all the time. And in Chile, we do not have, and I'm afraid it's the case of UBC, some coaching for new teachers coming every year and losing the expertise of those that were trained, or that those,
teacher turnover, huge challenge.
I wonder how much of the teachers that participated in the professional development program you applied are still there.
Very few, I'm sure.
Yes, and they are asking for some help at university and with our team that works with families. So I think they are facing difficult times. So how do you think?
No, and the whole notion of the original experimental study was of course, how should I put it? It was more academic than practical, in the sense that if you can prove that this works, or you can prove what part of it works, but that doesn't change the system at all, right? What changes the system is a commitment to ongoing versions of these interventions. I'm not thinking of them as interventions, thinking of them as just part of the professional life of teachers and of people working with teachers. So that's absolutely absolutely crucial for people to think about. And we would have to hope that if the process is one of helping professionalize the teaching profession, then the turnover will go down too, right? That teachers rotate out because they get discouraged because they're not being treated like the professionals they are.
Thank you. Can I add something?
Sure.
Absolutely, sure.
Thank you. It's that you made a point with the absentees. I'm sure in Chile we were not aware how serious that problem was all along the country, because schools lied to get the money from the government. And you say very kindly, but it was awful to realize that we were not aware. Children were not exposed to teaching most of the time. So thank you. I'm not sure we have solved the problem, but you made a point. And we'll face now, after the pandemic, in Chile, children are not going to school now. They are avoiding, families are avoiding sending
because
them.
of COVID.
Because that was a national practice, I'm afraid.
Well, I think we have to thank Kata Arbor for having recognized this and then developed the techniques to do it. But she also did, together with a couple of students, some very nice kind of ethnographic work going into into homes and talking to parents about why they do or why they don't send their kids to school. And particularly in preschool, the answers were often revealed the fact that they didn't think of the pre-kinder as school, right? It's like, oh, well, I was home from work today and I thought it would be more fun to hang out with my kids. Or his grandmother is coming next week, so I'm going to keep him home next week. That sort of kind of thing, that's fine if this is daycare, but when you're actually thinking of it as having academic advantages, then it's a big disruption. But then also you saw those kids in that freezing cold classroom wearing their winter coats. If they're a little bit sick, you really don't want to send them to those classrooms. If the streets are this deep with water, you don't want to send them to those classrooms. And so a lot of it is the larger infrastructure that makes it difficult. I can understand that, but it's a real challenge nonetheless.
Thank you.
Tenemos un comentario adicional. Maybe you have seen it already. It's by Vanessa Castro Cardenal. She says that there are some studies in Nicaragua that show that teachers who think high of themselves and implement good pedagogical practices in classes do not see themselves in the educational system in the next 5 years. So, which is a shame.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Vanessa, send that one too.
With a lot of pleasure, thank you.
Yo quisiera comentar algo que estamos cerrando con Les, pero primera infancia, literacidad, atención de calidad para los niños y las niñas más pequeñas ha sido un eje central de este congreso. La conferencia de Catherine, con su autorización, será reproducida después para que más personas la conozcan este trabajo, puedan estar en contacto con ella, pero están también las conferencias que ofrecieron explícitamente en el eje de literacidad en primera infancia de María Emilia López y de Carla Villaseñor, y las sesiones de trabajo también de este congreso. Me da muchísimo gusto, Catherine, que 20 años después de aparecido ese primer libro, hayamos crecido tanto en grupos de interés en torno a primera infancia y literacidad. Estoy muy, muy contenta de que tú siempre has abonado en este terreno, pero que en el Congreso hayamos tenido también otros trabajos en ese sentido. Muchas gracias nuevamente y bueno, muchísimas gracias a todas las personas que están aquí.
Gracias. Y gracias a ti, Alma, que has organizado la traducción del libro Un buen comienzo para difundir en México. Fue muy importante.
Gracias, Catherine. Y yo voy a hacer también explícito el agradecimiento a Elisa Bonilla Ríos, que estaba en México en ese momento como directora de materiales del Ministerio de Educación en México, de la Secretaría de Educación Pública, y también sin su ayuda no hubiera sido posible, y de Daniel Goldin, que estaba también en el Fondo de Cultura Económica en ese momento. Aliados de estas redes de trabajo para la lectura y la escritura en primera infancia. Gracias.
No sé si Malva aún tiene alguna pregunta o intervención. Es que veo la mano aún levantada. No sé si solamente se olvidó de bajarla.
Perdón.
No te preocupes. Está perfecto. Bueno.
Creo que estamos abusando de Katy.
Pues bueno, hay que aprovecharla. No siempre se tiene esta oportunidad. No sé si alguien más tenga algún comentario o alguna intervención que quiera hacer. Andrea García dice, excelente ponencia y congreso. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Andrea. Y Melba.
Gracias, Kathy. You are always inspiring. As said, thank you.
Thank you.
Bueno, al parecer no hay más intervenciones por parte de la audiencia. No sé qué opinen, si vamos dando cierre a nuestro encuentro. Son las 11:30 tiempo de México, para Catherine será una hora adelantada. Esto nos puede dar un poco de tiempo para prepararnos, ¿no?, para la siguiente y última conferencia de nuestro congreso. Y sí, mire, muchos comentarios. Gracias, gran congreso, felicidades a los compañeros, muchas gracias por la presentación. Sigamos en busca de la mejora de la lectura de los más pequeños, ¿cierto? Muchísimas gracias por este excelente encuentro, excelente, felicidades y gracias, muy clarificadora. Gracias a todos los que han enviado comentarios. Entonces, en vista del éxito de nuestro encuentro, a mí no me queda más que agradecerles a todos los que se prestaron a escuchar y participar. Agradecer, por supuesto, a la Universidad Iberoamericana Puebla por el apoyo que ha prestado al sumarse como convocante, como uno de los 3 convocantes principales, y hacer posible este encuentro, que aparentemente resulta ya, digamos, en la ejecución, pues un ejercicio muy sencillo de una simple videoconferencia, pero en realidad hay un trabajo grande, me gustaría decir inclusive la palabra titánico, de parte de un equipo técnico y de un equipo de soporte muy grande, que está prestando su apoyo desde las 8 de la mañana hasta las 8 de la noche, en múltiples computadoras, en múltiples salas, garantizando que todas las sesiones se puedan resolver de manera fluida y que no haya inconvenientes en la comunicación y que todas las presentaciones se puedan llevar a cabo como estuvo planeado. Entonces, nunca está de más hacer un reconocimiento público a la gente que no se ve en pantalla, a la gente que está detrás de las computadoras, garantizando que el encuentro pueda resultar de provecho para todos los asistentes. Entonces, pues nuevamente, a nombre del Comité Latinoamericano para el Desarrollo de la Lectura y la Escritura, a nombre de la Universidad Iberoamericana Puebla y a nombre del Consejo Puebla de Lectura, agradecemos su participación en esta conferencia 12 de nuestro 16º Congreso Latinoamericano para el Desarrollo de la Lectura y la Escritura, y nos encontraremos pues en algún otro encuentro. Muchas gracias a todos.
Gracias, Catherine. Gracias a todos. Chao.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Hasta pronto.
Pronto, Alma, gracias.
Gracias. Hasta prontito.